I woke up as the girl chapter 4 sends back to the family that could not keep her. What the comments do not know, because the author did not, is that the poor family was paid to take me back. They had my bags in the hall by 10, which is the detail the novel gets right, and which I have never been able to forgive it for, because it means somebody packed them before the meeting. 3 bags and a box. I came to on the stairs of a house called Bryn Orr, with my hand on a banister, and a woman crying in a room below me, and above the banister, in the air, in pale letters that nobody else in that house could see. Chapter 4. Finally. She has had that room for 23 years, and it was never hers. Carrie's is coming home. I want to be exact about what I had, because it was less than people assume. I read Slate on my phone across about a month, in the evenings, 40 pages at a time, and I liked it. It is a saga about a quarry family in Gwynedd, and it is well researched, and the Welsh in it is right, and in chapter 4 the Merediths discover that the daughter they raised is not theirs, and send her back down the hill to the Pritchards, and from chapter 5 onward she is the bitter one at the edge of every scene. I knew that shape. I did not know one date, and I did not know the ending, because I had got to about chapter 19 when I fell asleep on a Tuesday and woke up on a staircase. My name is Glenys Pask. I am 51, and for 18 years I was a probate researcher, which is a job most people have never heard of, and which is the reason none of the rest of this went the way the book intended. I found missing beneficiaries for 18 years. Heir hunting, if you want the tabloid word for it, though nobody in the trade says that. Somebody dies without a will, and the estate goes to the crown unless a relative can be found, and a firm like the one I worked for takes the list, and you sit with a screen and a set of registers, and you find a woman in Perth who does not know her grandfather had a brother. And what 18 years of that gives you is not sentiment about families, which I have none of, and it is not genealogy, which is a skill I am middling at. It is a single reflex, and the reflex is this: whenever anybody cannot be found, ask who benefits from the not finding. Because in that trade the estate is a fixed pot, and every person you locate makes every other share smaller, and I have sat across a table from a man in a good coat who was extremely keen to help me, and who was, it turned out, the reason 2 of the 11 cousins had not been contacted. Nobody in that work is looking for a villain. You are looking for a shape, a pot, a class of people entitled to it, and a hole in the class. So when I stood on a staircase in a house above a slate quarry and heard a woman crying about a blood test, the thing my head did was not what is going to happen to me. It was, there are 2 families in this, and one of them is about to receive a child it did not ask for. And in 18 years I have never once seen a person moved between 2 households for nothing. 4 cases from the 18 years, so you know what kind of woman was standing on that staircase. In 2009, I found a man in Dundee who did not know he had a sister, and the sister had died in 1994, and the call I had to make was to tell a man of 60 that he had had a sister for 40 years and had missed her by 15, and he said thank you, and then he said, does that mean I get something? And both of those were the same amount of true. In 2013, I traced 11 cousins on an estate of 400,000, and the 12th was a woman in prison, and the firm's view was that she would be difficult to contact, and I contacted her, and she got her share, and that is the only argument I ever had with my own employer. In 2017, I spent 9 months on a Cypriot line and got it wrong, completely, all of it, and a family took a payment that was not theirs, and it was recovered 18 months later, and I have never stopped thinking about the letter they got. And in every single one of those years, 4 or 5 times a year, somebody helpful appeared, a neighbor, a carer, a nephew, a man in a good coat who wanted to assist and who knew a great deal about who could not be found. They are never sinister. That is the thing nobody believes. They bring biscuits, and they know the family history, and they are genuinely the only person who understands how any of it works. And about 1 time in 6, they are the reason the class has a hole in it. Bryn Ore is the house and Bryn Ore is the quarry, and the two have not been the same thing since 1961, which nobody in that valley ever says out loud. The Merediths sold the working quarry in the year of the strike and kept the house and the freehold of the mountain and about 400 acres. The quarry itself is run now by a company from Cheshire that takes about 11,000 tons a year off the western terraces for architectural slate, which is the expensive kind, and it employs 31 people in a village of 600, and that is the entire economy of the place. The Merediths do not work. Ellen Meredith, who I was calling ma'am by day 2 out of pure animal instinct, gardens and sits on things. Rodri Meredith is 70 and reads. ELO is 26 and is on the board of the quarry company by a right that nobody has ever been able to explain to me, and is exactly as competent as that sentence suggests. And in 23 years, the book says, and the family says, and the village says, they raised a daughter who was not theirs because 2 babies were confused at a cottage hospital in Bangor in 2002. Hywel Pritchard did not want me either. That is the thing that broke the whole story open, and it happened on the second day, in a terraced kitchen at the bottom of the hill, in front of a plate of Welsh cakes that had been bought and not made. I had come down with the 3 bags and the box, and the comments were beside themselves. This is the scene, her real ma'am. I have waited 4 chapters, and Hywel Pritchard, who is 53 and who works at the Spar in Lamberis, put the plate down and could not look at me, and said, "You'll have the back room. It's got damp on the one wall. I've put a dehumidifier." And I said, "Thank you." And then she said, "How long are they saying?" How long are they saying? Nobody says that to a daughter who has just been given back to them after 23 years. That is a sentence about an arrangement. I said I did not know, and she said, "Only I'll need to know for the room." And then she went out to the yard and stood there for about 4 minutes, and I sat in a kitchen with a plate of shop Welsh cakes and understood that whatever was happening in that valley, it was not 2 families discovering a mistake. It was 2 families executing something, and the one at the bottom of the hill was doing it badly because nobody had rehearsed her. The comments were no help at all, and I want to say so plainly because in the other stories people tell about this sort of thing, the comments are a superpower, and mine were a crowd at a window. They had read 3 chapters further than me, and they never once said anything that turned out to matter. They said Carrie's is so lovely. They said I hope Tegan gets what is coming. They speculated for 9 chapters about whether Iolo would end up with the girl from the shop. And in the 5th week, when I was sitting in a library with the title register open on a laptop, one of them wrote, "This arc is so boring now, nothing is happening," and it was the single most useful thing any of them ever said, because it told me that whatever I was doing was not in the book, and that from that point on I was outside the plot, and nobody, including the 400,000 people watching, had any idea what came next. That is when I stopped being frightened of them. A crowd that can see everything and understands nothing is not a threat, it is weather. The 1878 lease pays a royalty on every ton. That is the pot, and it took me 9 days to find it, and I found it the way you find everything in that job, which is by reading the boring document rather than the interesting one. Everybody in that valley talks about the sale in 1961. Nobody talks about the lease, because a lease from 1878 sounds like a museum exhibit, and it is not. It is live, and it is registered, and anybody can buy a copy of the title for £11, and I did. On the 3rd evening, on a laptop in a back room with damp on the one wall. In 1878, the mountain belonged to 11 freeholders, small men, farmers, and the quarry company of the day took a lease over the mineral rights and agreed to pay a royalty of a fixed sum per ton to those 11 and their lineal descendants, in perpetuity in the proportions set out in a schedule. Over 147 years, the 11 have become about 400 people scattered across the world, and most of them get £9 a year and think it is a joke, and the administration of it is a nightmare that nobody has ever wanted to inherit. And Clause 9 says that where no lineal descendant of a named freeholder survives, that freeholder's share does not go to the others. It reverts to the owner of the freehold of the mountain, which is the Merediths. Hywel Pritchard of Tanny Bualk was one of the 11. His line came down through 4 generations to Nerys, and Nerys has one child, and the child is me. I should say what those first months in the village were, because the novel skips them, and they are most of what actually happened to that girl. 600 people, a spar, a chapel that does 1 service a month, a club, a primary school with 41 on the roll, and a bus at 7:30 and 4:30, and everybody knew. Not the arrangement. Nobody knew that, but everybody knew that the girl from the big house was in the back bedroom at Nerys Pritchards, and there is no version of walking into a shop in a place like that where you are not the subject. They were not cruel. That is what I would want understood. In 4 months, not one person in that village said anything unkind to me, and about 9 of them went out of their way, and a woman called Bronwyn, who I had never met, brought a casserole on the 2nd week and stayed 40 minutes and did not ask one question. What they were was careful, in the way people are careful around a bereavement, and being handled that gently by 600 people is its own kind of exhausting. And twice a week somebody would say, in the shop or at the bus stop, some version of, well, blood's blood, isn't it? And mean it kindly. And every time I wanted to say that blood is a clause in a lease from 1878, and that 400 people in 6 countries are entitled to £9 a year because of it. Huw Vellacott has been the land agent since 2011. He is 63 and he is not family, and he has an office over the chemist in the town with a brass plate on the door, and he administers the royalty and the estate and the farm tenancies, and he is, everybody in that valley told me at different times and in the same words, the only one who knows how any of it works. That is always the sentence. In 18 years of probate work, I heard that sentence about a particular person in perhaps 40 estates, and it was true every single time, and about 6 times it was true because the person had arranged for it to be true. The Pritchard share is 1/11 of the royalty. On 11,000 tons a year at the current indexed rate, it is a little over £4,000 a year, which is not a fortune, and which is not nothing in a house where the spar is the job, and Nerys has been receiving it since 2009. And if the Pritchard line fails, that £4,000 a year reverts to the freeholder in perpetuity, along with, and this is the part that turns £4,000 into a reason, the entitlement to consent to any variation of the lease, which under Clause 14 requires the agreement of the holders of not less than 3/4 of the royalty by share. The company from Cheshire has wanted to take the Eastern Terraces since 2019. The Eastern Terraces are worth, on the figures in the planning application, which is a public document, somewhere north of £40 million over 20 years, and they cannot touch them without a variation of the 1878 lease, and the variation needs 3/4 by share, and the Merediths and the holders they can carry come to 71%, and the Pritchard 11th is the difference. So this is what actually happened, and none of it is in the novel, and I put it together over about 5 weeks with a laptop, a library card, and 1 telephone call to a woman I used to work with. In 2002, a child was born to Nerys Pritchard at the Cottage Hospital in Bangor. That child was me, and there was never a confusion of any kind. In the same month, Ellen Meredith, who had wanted a daughter for 11 years and had been told in the January that there would not be one, came to an arrangement, and the arrangement was brokered by the land agent's office of the day, and £9,000 went to a family at the bottom of the hill, and a baby went up the hill, and it was registered as a Meredith because in 2002, in that valley, the registrar was a man who had known Rodri Meredith since school. It was not a swap, it was a purchase, and it was done in a way that 400 people in that village half knew and nobody has ever said. and it worked perfectly for 23 years until somebody in a land agent's office over a chemist opened the 1878 lease in about 2019 and worked out that the girl in the big house was the last of the Pritchard line, and that as long as she was legally a Meredith, the reversion could not be triggered, and as long as she was factually a Pritchard the 11th could not be voted. Thank you for listening to Channel Crystal Novel. She had to be moved. That is the whole of Chapter 4. A blood test that nobody asked for in a family with no medical reason to take 3 years after a land agent read a lease. And once she was down the hill and back in the Pritchard line, the 11th was hers, and a girl of 23 with 3 bags in a box, living in a back room with damp on the one wall, on the charity of a woman who had been paid £9,000 to give her up, could be asked very kindly to sign something. They tried something else first, in the September, and it was much better than the deed, and it very nearly worked. Carys Bowen came to see me. She is the real daughter, the one the book is rooting for, and she is 23, and she had been in that big house for 2 months, and she is, and I want this on the record, an entirely decent person, who has done nothing to anybody. She came down the hill on a Sunday and sat in Glenys Pritchard's kitchen and said she felt sick about all of it and that she had asked them to let her come. And then she said that Huw had explained the variation to her and that she thought the fair thing was for the 2 of us to split whatever came out of it, and she had brought a piece of paper on which she had written, in her own hand, an undertaking to pay me half of anything she ever received from the estate. She meant it. She had written it out herself, with a biro, and the date at the top, like a school exercise, and I sat there with a girl who had been moved up a hill the same month I was moved down one, offering me half of a thing neither of us had chosen, and I understood that whoever had sent her had understood something about me that I had not, that I could hold out against Iolo shouting and against Ellen crying on a doorstep, and that the one thing I would find almost impossible was a kind person asking me to be reasonable so that she could stop feeling sick. I said no. I said it badly, and she cried, and Nereis came in and asked what I had done, and I could not explain any of it without explaining Clause 14 to 2 people who did not want a lecture, and Carys went back up the hill and has never come down again. The job at the weighbridge is worth 4 sentences because it is where I got everything. A weighbridge docket records the lorry, the time, the gross, the tare, and the net is the tonnage, and the tonnage is what the royalty is calculated on. I did those dockets 3 days a week for 11 months, which means that the woman they were trying to buy out of the 1878 lease was, the entire time, the person keying in the number the 1878 lease runs on. Nobody in that office ever thought about it once, and what the dockets show, which I did not go looking for and which fell out of the work, is that the tonnage off the western terraces has been falling since 2021, from about 13,000 to about 11, because the good rock is nearly out, and that is the actual reason for the hurry about the eastern terraces, and it is not in any document anybody would ever have shown me. They needed one signature, and it was mine. The deed of variation came in the November, 4 months after Chapter 4, and it came the way these things always come, which is at the end of a long, friendly conversation about something else. Huw Vellacott had been kind to me since the first week. He was the only person in that valley who had been. He found me a job at the quarry office doing the weighbridge dockets, which is real work and which I was glad of, and he took me through the royalty and explained the schedule and said more than once that it had been a disgrace how I had been treated and that the estate had a duty to me. And in the November he said that the company wanted to modernize the lease, that the 1878 terms were absurd, that the royalty as calculated was worth a fraction of what it should be, and that under the variation the Pritchard share would be commuted to a fixed payment of £140,000. £140,000 to a girl in a back room. And he put it in front of me with a pen and he said, "Take it to a solicitor. I mean that. I'll pay for it." And he meant it. That is the thing I want understood about the quiet ones. he would have paid for the solicitor, and the solicitor would have advised correctly that £140,000 now is an excellent outcome against £4,000 a year. And any competent solicitor in that county would have told me to sign, and would have been right on the numbers I was shown. What is not in the numbers is that commuting the royalty extinguishes the consent right that goes with it, and that the consent right is what is actually being bought, and that the Eastern Terraces are worth $40 million. Nobody lied to me. Every figure in that document is accurate. And I sat in an office over a chemist with a pen in my hand and 18 years of asking who benefits from the not finding, and I said the only sentence I have ever been proud of. I said, "Huw, what does the variation do to Clause 14? He answered me, completely, honestly, in about 4 minutes, because he is not a criminal and had never once needed to be. He said the consent right went with the commutation, and that this was standard, and that a fixed payment gives certainty, all true. And I said I would think about it. And that is the whole climax of this story, and I know it is not what anybody wants. I did not stand up in a room. I did not read anything out. I did not go to a newspaper, and there was no scene of any kind at any point. I simply did not sign, not that week, and not in the January when the offer went to 190, and not in the April when Hywel Meredith came down the hill and stood in Pritchard's kitchen and shouted for 11 minutes about what my family had done for me, in that room to that woman, with her at the sink. Not in the June when the company's own solicitors wrote to me directly, and I did not answer. And not in the September when Ellen Meredith, who had raised me, came to the door of a terraced house and cried on the step and said she had never wanted any of it, and that she had only ever wanted a daughter, which I believe entirely, and which does not alter one line of the 1878 lease. I want to describe the 14 months honestly, because it is the part that would actually be useful to somebody. It is not a siege, and it is not dramatic. It is a series of ordinary weeks in which nothing happens, and in each of which there is one small moment where signing would end it. It is a solicitor's letter, in the June that is perfectly polite, and that you read 4 times, looking for the threat, and there is no threat, which is worse. It is the man on the weighbridge, who is decent, saying he had heard there was a bit of money going, and would it not be daft to turn it down, and meaning it kindly. It is near us at the sink, after Iolo's 11 minutes, not defending me, and not blaming me, just standing there, and me knowing exactly what 4,000 a year is in that house. It is Christmas. And the thing nobody tells you about a refusal is that it has no evidence. If you produce a document, you have done something, and there is a thing on a table, and people can look at it. If you simply do not sign, there is nothing at all to show anybody, ever, and the whole of your position lives inside your own head, and the only person who can tell you that you are right is you, at 4 a.m, on a fortnightly basis, for 14 months. I got it out and looked at it about 30 times. Twice I signed my name on a piece of scrap paper to see what it felt like. 14 months. That is what it cost. And I am not going to pretend those 14 months were noble, because for most of them I was frightened and lonely and doing Weybridge dockets and going back at night to a room with a dehumidifier in it, and about twice a week I got the pen out and looked at it. A refusal is not an act. It is the absence of one, repeated in the face of people being reasonable at you, and there is no moment in it that anybody would film. There was an inquiry of a kind, in the end, and it was not about me. The 2002 arrangement came out in the 3rd year, and the registrar of births was interviewed and is retired, and the police took a view that a false registration 23 years old, by a man who is 80, with no living complainant who wishes to complain, was not in the public interest, which I was told in a telephone call of about 4 minutes, and which I have not challenged. What did happen is that the county council reviewed its historic registration practice for that district, and found 11 other entries between 1994 and 2004 where the informant and the registrar were connected, and that review is a public document that nobody has read, and I have read it, and I am not going to say anything about the 11 because some of them are people who do not know. The estate's administration was moved to a firm in Chester, and the land agent's office over the chemist closed in the second winter. And the Cheshire Company's Cumbrian site opened in the 4th year and employs 40 people, and there is a village there where somebody like me has presumably never once looked at the lease. The royalty was paid in the second spring. What ended it was not me. The variation lapsed because the company's option on the eastern terraces was time-limited and expired in the February, and the Cheshire Board would not renew it at the price with the consent unresolved, and they went to a site in Cumbria instead, and 31 jobs in that village stayed exactly as they were, and about 11 that would have come did not. I am aware of what that means, and I have been told about it in the spar. Huw Vellacott was not sanctioned by anybody for anything, because nothing he did in 2019 or in the November was unlawful, and the only thing that ever came close was the 2002 arrangement, and that is where the second thing is. When the family's papers went to a solicitor in the 3rd year in the course of a probate that had nothing to do with any of it, there is a ledger from the land agent's office, and in it, in March 2002, there is a payment of £9,000, described as compensation, agricultural, to N. Pritchard, and the ledger is not Huw Vellacott's. He came in 2011. The 2002 ledger is his predecessor's, and his predecessor is dead, and the initials in the margin approving the payment are RM. And Rodri Meredith is 73, and reads in a chair in a house above a quarry, and has never said one word to me in 3 years about anything at all. Nerys and I are not reconciled, and we are not estranged. She told me the whole of it herself in the second winter, at that kitchen table, without being asked, and she did not excuse any of it, and the sentence she used was, "I was 29, and we had nothing, and they had everything, and I have thought about you every day, and both of those are true, and you can do what you like with them. I have not done anything with them." There is one more thing about Nerys, and I am going to put it in, because leaving it out would tidy her up, and she has not earned tidying, and neither have I. In the second winter, after she told me the whole of 2002 at that table, I asked her the only question I actually wanted answered, which was not why she took the 9,000. It was whether anybody had ever asked her, in 23 years, how she was. And she thought about it properly, for a long time, the way she does, and then she said that a woman from the health visitor had asked her in 2003, and that she had said fine. That is it. That is the entire pastoral history of a woman who sold a child in a valley of 600 people where everybody half knew. And I have thought since that the reason the arrangement held for 23 years is not fear, and it is not money. It is that nobody in that village ever asked anybody a direct question about anything, ever, and that a place can be kind and warm and bring you a casserole and still be a machine for not asking. I still live in that house. The damp wall is fixed, by me badly. She is at the spar. We watch things together in the evenings, and we do not discuss 2002, and about twice a year one of us gets close to it and stops. Iolo I have to mention once more, because the loud one usually gets the least honest treatment, and he deserves better than none. After the option lapsed in the February, he came down the hill one more time, sober, on a weekday, and stood in the yard rather than the kitchen, and he said, "You've cost this village 11 jobs." And I said that was true. He said, "And you're pleased with yourself." And I said no, and that was true as well. And then he said the thing that I did not have an answer for and still do not, which is, then who was it for? Not for me. 4,000 a year, and a room with a dehumidifier is not a win by any measure anybody in that village would recognize. Not for Nerys, who lost a payment she had been promised and has never once mentioned it. Not for the 400 beneficiaries, most of whom will never know their consent right was nearly commuted out from under them. I have thought about his question for 3 years, and the closest I have come is that it was for the lease itself, for a document from 1878 that 11 farmers signed with a solicitor in Carnarvon, who was presumably being paid by the quarry company, and who put Clause 14 in anyway. Somebody in 1878 built a lock. 11 farmers who could mostly not read, in a room in Carnarvon, being bought out of a mountain by a company with a London solicitor, and one of them, or somebody acting for one of them, held out long enough to get a sentence in about consent. I have the engrossment. It is 4 feet of parchment in the county archive, and the signatures at the bottom are 7 names and 4 marks, and the 4 marks are crosses, and one of the crosses is Hywel Pritchard of Tanybwilch, who is my great-great-great-grandfather, and who is the reason a company in Cheshire went to Cumbria. He did not know what he was doing. He put a cross on a document he could not read because a man in a coat told him where to put it, and he went home up a mountain road afterwards to a house with no floor in it, and he never in his life saw 1 penny of the royalty, and neither did his son. And it held for 147 years, and it held because a clause does not need anybody to understand it. It only needs somebody, once, at the right moment, to decline to give it away. I get £4,011 a year. That is what the whole business was about, and it arrives by bank transfer in April, and it is, as a sum of money, ridiculous. I have never spent any of it. It is in an account, and it is at about 14,000 now, and I have no plan for it, and I have noticed that not spending it is its own kind of statement that I have not examined too closely, and I do the royalty now. That is the thing that happened in the 3rd year that I could not have predicted. The administration of the 1878 royalty is a nightmare that nobody wants, and there are about 400 beneficiaries across 6 countries, and roughly 140 of them are what my old trade calls untraced, and when the estate advertised for somebody to take it on, I applied, and Huw Vellacott, who has every reason to hate me, and who has never once been anything other than correct, recommended me for it. So I sit in a back room in a terraced house in Gwynedd with a laptop and a set of registers, and I find missing beneficiaries, which is exactly what I did for 18 years in another life, on behalf of a lease that somebody tried to use to erase me. I have traced 61 of the 140. 11 of them did not know they were Welsh. 1 of them is in Patagonia, and 1 is in a care home in Wolverhampton, and 1 is a boy of 9 in Bristol, whose share is £4 a year, and whose mother rang me to ask if it was a scam. And every single one of them that I find makes the class larger and the reversion further away, and the eastern terraces harder to touch, forever, and not 1 person in that valley has ever said that out loud to me. And Huw Vellacott knows exactly what I am doing, and he recommended me for it anyway, and I have never worked out whether that was decency or fatigue. So here is what I want to know from you, since you have been in that kitchen with me the whole way. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next.